It was one of those deceptively peaceful afternoons in the quiet suburb of West Haven, where the leaves swirled lazily in the breeze and the birds chirped on the branches above. The sun was dipping low, casting a warm, golden hue across the neighborhood. Homes sat in neat rows, lawns freshly mowed, and the rhythmic hum of life in this corner of the world seemed as predictable as clockwork. Yet, amid this picturesque scene, an undercurrent of tension rippled through the air, unnoticed by most, except for one. Linda the Karen was already watching. She wasn't the average neighbor who waved from her front porch or joined in for the occasional block party. No, Linda had a singular mission in life: to uphold the HOA's rules with an iron fist. She had no problem becoming the neighborhood watchdog, always lurking just beyond the periphery, her eyes scanning for any small sign of rebellion against the sacred code of regulations. And as president of the HOA, she wielded power like a scalpel, sharp and precise, cutting down anything she deemed out of place. For most, it was just a harmless collection of bylaws. But to Linda, it was a religion, one she intended to enforce with meticulous fervor. And right now, she had zeroed in on her next target: a modest, newly built fence. It had begun innocently enough. A homeowner, someone who had lived in West Haven for just a few years, decided to build a simple wooden fence along the edge of their backyard. The property was bordered by tall trees, but with the neighborhood growing denser, the homeowner felt the need for a bit more privacy, a little more space to enjoy the serenity of their own home. Nothing grand, nothing ostentatious, just a small, unassuming wooden barrier that barely reached the height of the neighbor's garden bushes. It was hardly the kind of thing that would spark a neighborhood feud. But to Linda, it was an abomination, a sign of defiance. It was something that had to be stopped before it spread like a virus, an affront to the carefully constructed order of West Haven's suburban perfection. Without a word, without even an ounce of direct conversation, she took it upon herself to track down this supposed violation. There were rules for a reason, and by God, if someone wasn't following them, she would be there to enforce them. No exceptions. Linda had always been a woman who valued control, and there was something about that fence, the simple, humble fence, that rubbed her the wrong way. It was the first sign of something larger, something she feared could disrupt the status quo. And so, like a predator stalking its prey, Linda kept a watchful eye from behind the curtains of her living room window. As the homeowner hammered in the last few nails, Linda's gaze never wavered. With the precision of a hunter, she snapped photos from her window, the clicking of her camera barely audible amidst the chirping of birds outside. Her phone buzzed in her hand as she sent the images off to the HOA board, attaching a stern message outlining her concerns. "This fence violates Section 7B of our community guidelines," she typed, her fingers tapping furiously on the screen. "Immediate action required. This is a direct breach of our regulations." The homeowner had no idea what was coming. They'd simply wanted a little more privacy. Nothing more, nothing less. But as they wiped their brow, stepping back to admire their handiwork, they never saw Linda's gaze following them from across the street. The peace of the moment was shattered by the unspoken promise of something far more sinister lurking on the horizon. That evening, as the homeowner settled down for a quiet dinner, unaware of the storm that was about to hit, Linda's plan was already in motion. She would not let this go unnoticed. No, this fence would not stand without consequences. The HOA board would hear about it, and the neighbors would know exactly where the line was drawn. But little did Linda know, this wouldn't be the easy victory she expected. The homeowner wasn't one to back down. And soon, they would realize just how far they were willing to go to defend their rights, especially against someone like Linda, who was about to discover that her power wasn't as limitless as she believed. Visuals. The sun slowly dipping behind the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the calm neighborhood. Linda's silhouette lurking behind the drawn curtains of her window, eyes sharp and unblinking, as the homeowner, oblivious, stands on their porch, surveying the simple fence with satisfaction. The quiet hum of suburban life is broken only by the click of Linda's camera, a sound that echoes in the stillness like the first raindrops before a storm. The following morning broke with an unusual stillness that seemed to hang heavy in the air. Birds chirped their usual morning chorus, but there was something subtly off, a tension, like the calm before a thunderstorm. Across the street, the homeowners stood on their porch, sipping coffee, admiring the fence they had worked so hard to build. The smell of fresh wood still lingered in the air, and they felt a sense of accomplishment. The privacy it provided was just what they needed in this increasingly crowded neighborhood. What could possibly go wrong? Little did they know, the storm was already brewing. Linda had watched the fence rise day by day, her eyes tracking every movement, her mind churning with the thought of every rule it might be violating. Her obsession was growing. She couldn't stop herself. The fence was her personal vendetta now. She wasn't just a concerned neighbor. No, this was something much deeper. It was a mission. And in her mind, no one in West Haven could break the sacred rules without consequence. That morning, as the sun rose, Linda didn't sit idly by. No, she had already devised a plan. Armed with a camera and a notepad, she parked her car a few houses down and waited, watching from the shadows of a large oak tree across the street. The homeowner, busy with their morning routine, seemed oblivious to the fact that they were being watched. From the comfort of her car, Linda snapped a photo of the newly built fence, zooming in on the parts that she believed were questionable. Every angle was covered. She didn't just photograph the fence itself. Oh no, Linda wasn't that naive. She captured the entire scene, a perfect picture of defiance in her eyes. The way the fence met the property line, the slight overhang of the wooden slats, the height that was just a bit too tall, just a bit too out of line with the HOA-approved design. Linda wasn't done. She checked her watch. Her next move was already planned. Slowly, she opened her phone, navigating to the HOA's email group. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Violation report. Urgent action required. She typed, hitting the send button with finality. She didn't need to be patient. She knew the board would respond quickly. They always did when she called for help. She was the watchdog, the one who kept everyone in check after all. But what she didn't anticipate was what would happen next. As she sat there, watching from her parked car, Linda's stomach churned. A small, gnawing doubt crept into her mind. Was she really doing the right thing? It wasn't that she doubted the rulebook. No, the rules were clear. But as she observed the homeowner's quiet, content smile as they fixed a broken fence post, she couldn't help but wonder if maybe she was being a little too harsh. But the thought was fleeting, quickly overtaken by the rush of righteous fury. The rules were the rules, and no one, not even the seemingly harmless neighbors, could be allowed to break them. As Linda snapped one last photo, she noticed something she hadn't before. The homeowner had started walking toward the mailbox. For a moment, Linda froze, a sharp thrill running down her spine. What if they saw her? What if they confronted her about the fence? The homeowner had no idea Linda was the one behind the complaints, but that wouldn't last much longer. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. The HOA had responded. Her eyes widened as she read the message. It was clear that they were already taking her complaint seriously. A meeting was being scheduled to discuss her report, and in the meantime, they would send out an official notice to the homeowner. Linda's pulse quickened. This was it. This was her moment. The homeowner didn't stand a chance. She would have them removed from the neighborhood in no time. The sense of control, the thrill of enforcing the rules, it was intoxicating. Yet, just as Linda began to feel the excitement bubbling up inside her, something caught her eye. The homeowner was no longer walking toward the mailbox. They were heading toward their backyard, heading straight for the fence. But instead of simply admiring it, they reached for something, a hammer, perhaps, or a tool. No, it was something much more unsettling. A stack of legal documents, papers that, in Linda's mind, could only mean one thing. The homeowner wasn't just sitting idly by. They knew what was coming. They were preparing for a fight. Visuals, The heavy silence of the morning, broken only by the distant hum of a lawnmower and the occasional rustle of leaves. Linda, hidden behind the tinted windows of her car, her camera snapping relentlessly, every click a building crescendo of suspicion. The homeowner's figure, walking toward the mailbox in the distance, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. The stack of legal papers emerging from the homeowner's hand, sharp, crisp, and full of intent, filling Linda with a sudden, unsettling sense of dread. What had once seemed like a harmless confrontation was now evolving into something far more intense, and Linda couldn't help but wonder, had she underestimated them? The day passed in a haze of uneasy anticipation. As the sun set and the shadows lengthened across the neatly manicured lawns of West Haven, the homeowner could feel the weight of the impending conflict pressing down on them. It was a quiet evening. Too quiet, almost. The house was still, the kind of stillness that always seemed to precede a storm. And then it came. It wasn't the thunderous knock on the door or the looming presence of an overbearing neighbor. No, it was something more insidious, more methodical, a letter. A simple, innocuous envelope that, to anyone else, might seem like just another piece of junk mail. But to the homeowner, it was a harbinger of war. The thick, official-looking envelope arrived just as the last light of day slipped behind the horizon. The homeowner, curious but unaware of the storm about to unfold, sliced the envelope open, expecting to find nothing more than a reminder about HOA dues or a newsletter. Instead, their fingers froze over the neatly folded paper inside. Notice of violation was printed at the top in bold, sharp letters that almost seemed to scream at them from the page. The words leaped off the paper, each line sharper than the last, cutting into the homeowner's calm like a blade. With every sentence they read, the world around them seemed to blur. Violation of Section 7B, unauthorized fence construction. Immediate removal required. The letter read, followed by the legal jargon, threats of escalating fines, and a stern demand for compliance. But what truly froze the homeowner's blood was the signature at the bottom. It was Linda's signature. The sharp, aggressive scrawl confirmed the worst. Linda had not only been the one to file a complaint, but she was now using her position as HOA president to bring down the full force of the organization. She wasn't simply questioning the fence's existence, she was declaring it an offense, a blight on the perfect facade of West Haven. The homeowner's hand trembled as they read the document once more, the weight of the words settling heavily in their chest. This wasn't just a neighbor's opinion. This was an official, formal declaration that their choice to build a fence was a crime in the eyes of the HOA. And Linda, with all her self-appointed authority, had made sure it wasn't just a casual complaint. This was a threat. Cease and desist immediately, or legal action will be taken. The letter concluded ominously. The homeowner felt the ground shift beneath them. The sense of invincibility they'd felt only hours before, when they'd proudly gazed at the simple fence they'd built, was gone, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. They were in the crosshairs now. They weren't just a homeowner trying to protect their privacy. No, in Linda's eyes, they were a criminal. The first wave of panic surged through their chest. How could this be happening? They hadn't broken any laws. They had simply put up a fence, something that every homeowner should be entitled to do. But Linda had twisted the situation. She had manufactured a violation, something that never existed until she decided it did. They rushed to the window, glancing out at the quiet street. Across the road, Linda's house sat dark and foreboding, like a watchtower, her presence looming large even from a distance. The homeowner could almost feel her eyes on them, watching from behind her curtains, knowing that she had succeeded. The letter was just the beginning. The fight had officially started. But the homeowner wasn't one to back down. Something deep within them stirred, a sense of defiance, a need to stand tall in the face of adversity. This wasn't just about a fence anymore. This was about justice, about standing up against an unjust system that had been weaponized by a single person with too much power. The next move was clear. They would fight back. With steady hands, the homeowner gathered their thoughts and headed for the desk, where they kept their personal documents. They knew the rules. They knew the law. They were within their rights to build the fence. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Visuals. The cold, sterile letter, its stark black text almost leaping off the page. The bold, commanding signature of Linda at the bottom like a personal stamp of power. The dim glow of the house's interior as the homeowner stands frozen, the weight of the paper heavy in their hands, the tension palpable in the air. Outside, the peaceful neighborhood is now tinged with the threat of something darker, as the shadows of Linda's home loom across the street, the unsettling silence of impending conflict filling every corner of the street. The storm was no longer a distant rumble. It was here, and it was only going to get worse. The air felt heavier the next morning, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. The sky had darkened, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of a storm. The homeowner sat at the kitchen table, the letter from Linda still sitting in front of them, its edges curling slightly, a constant reminder of the battle ahead. The decision had been made. They would fight. But as the clock ticked, a strange unease filled the room. The calm before the storm was rapidly dissipating, and the homeowner felt a gnawing instinct that something more was coming. Something far more unsettling than a mere letter. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence like a crack of thunder. The homeowner froze, their heart skipping a beat. They weren't expecting anyone. Not today, not with everything happening. For a moment, they hesitated, glancing through the peephole to find nothing but a figure standing at the edge of the porch, dressed in dark blue, a faint badge glinting at his hip. A police officer. A chill crept down their spine as they swallowed hard, wondering if this was the moment everything would spiral out of control. Had Linda taken her vendetta so far that she had involved the authorities? The thought made their blood run cold. They had hoped this wouldn't escalate to the level of legal intervention, but the reality hit hard. With a deep breath, they opened the door. "Good morning," the officer said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm Officer Daniels. We've received a complaint about your property, about the fence. I'm just here to verify some details." The homeowner blinked in confusion, taken aback. The officer wasn't here to arrest them. He wasn't even here to issue a citation. He was just there to verify. But there was something about his presence that made it all feel so much more real, so much more dangerous. The tension in the air thickened, the weight of the situation pressing down like an invisible hand on their chest. "The fence," Officer Daniels repeated, looking down at the yard. "It's been brought to my attention that it might be in violation of HOA guidelines. I'm just here to take a look," confirmed the report. The homeowner nodded slowly, their thoughts racing. Was this real? Was the HOA really involving law enforcement in something as simple as a fence? But before they could form a coherent thought, the officer was already walking toward the yard, his boots crunching against the gravel path. His eyes swept over the fence with clinical precision, measuring, scrutinizing, as if expecting to see something criminal in the simple structure. The homeowner's pulse quickened. What was going on? Was this some kind of strange misunderstanding? The officer seemed polite enough, but the feeling of being scrutinized, of having their personal space invaded by an outsider, was suffocating. They followed him onto the front steps, hands clenched by their sides, barely able to contain the growing sense of unease. After a few tense moments, Officer Daniels turned back, his brow furrowed in confusion. "You know what," he said, glancing over at the homeowner. "I was actually informed that I had jurisdiction here, but this is not my district. This complaint came from outside my area. And frankly, this is more of an HOA matter than a legal one." The words hung in the air like a whisper of something more sinister, something unsettling. The officer wasn't sure why he had been called here. And neither was the homeowner. A part of them wanted to laugh, to scream that this was all ridiculous, an absurd waste of time. But another part felt a knot tighten in their stomach. What if this was just the beginning? "So, what does this mean?" the homeowner asked, their voice barely above a whisper. "What happens now?" The officer shrugged, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Honestly, I'm just here to make sure the complaint was legitimate. But the HOA should be handling this, not me. I'll take my report, and I'm sure they'll be in touch if there's further action needed." The officer gave a polite nod, then turned and began walking back to his car. The homeowner stood frozen on the doorstep, watching as the officer drove away. The faint buzzing in their ears was almost deafening as the weight of the encounter settled over them. Was this what it had come to? A simple fence had now attracted police attention. Visuals. The door creaks opened slowly, revealing Officer Daniels standing there, his posture tense, but his expression unreadable, the badge catching the light as his shadow stretches across the doorstep. The officer's every movement seems deliberate, scrutinizing the fence with a critical eye, the air thick with the unspoken question. Is this really what has become of the neighborhood? The sound of boots crunching against the gravel echoes in the silence, every footstep a grim reminder of the chaos unfolding. As the officer leaves, the quiet return of the neighborhood feels unnervingly hollow, the homeowner standing on the threshold, their pulse still racing from the sudden confrontation. But as the officer's car disappears down the street, another, far more unsettling thought lingers. Linda had gone too far, and this wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The next few days passed in a blur, the tension between the homeowner and Linda simmering beneath the surface of suburban life. The encounter with Officer Daniels left a lingering unease in the air, as if the quiet neighborhood was on the verge of unraveling. The homeowner couldn't shake the feeling that Linda's influence was reaching into every corner of their life now, spreading like an invasive weed, pushing against the fragile walls of peace they had once taken for granted. But it was on a cool, misty morning, as the sun began to peek out from behind a veil of clouds, that something unexpected happened. The homeowner was in the kitchen, brewing coffee, trying to shake off the stress of the previous days, when there came a knock on the door. This time, they didn't hesitate. Their hand was already on the knob, the anticipation thick in the air. Was it another letter? Another visit from the authorities? Or perhaps it was Linda herself, standing on the porch with yet another complaint. When they opened the door, they were greeted not by a face of authority or judgment, but by someone far less expected. It was their next-door neighbor, Steve. Steve was a quiet, reclusive type, someone who kept to himself, rarely involved in the neighborhood drama. He was a man of few words, always with his head down, lost in his work. But today, he stood at the threshold with a determined look in his eyes, a file clutched in his hand. "Hey, I thought I'd stop by. Got something that might help you out," Steve said, his voice low but earnest. The homeowner blinked in confusion. What could Steve possibly have to offer? Was he here to add fuel to the fire, or had Linda's crusade somehow reached him too? Before the homeowner could speak, Steve pushed the file into their hands. It was thick, several pages packed inside, and as they opened it, they saw a collection of documents, official letters, emails, and detailed records. Their eyes widened as they skimmed through the pages. "I've been dealing with Linda for years," Steve continued, his voice steady now. "She's been difficult, to say the least. I've seen what she's done to other people in the neighborhood. You're not the first one she's targeted. I don't think you should have to fight this alone." The homeowner stared at Steve, taken aback by his sudden openness. He wasn't the type to engage in neighborhood politics, let alone get involved in a confrontation with someone like Linda. But here he was, offering help, providing proof that Linda wasn't the untouchable authority figure she presented herself to be. Steve glanced around, making sure no one else was in earshot, then stepped closer. "I've been keeping an eye on her for a while. She's been using her position to push people around, making complaints that aren't even based on real violations. And this HOA thing, it's her playground. But the truth is, she's been overstepping for months. I've got the evidence here. If you want, you can use it to fight back." The homeowner felt a wave of disbelief, They had no idea that Steve had been tracking Linda's manipulations or that anyone else had seen through her facade of control. It was almost too much to process. Steve's eyes softened as he noticed the homeowner's hesitation. "I get it. You're not the kind of person who wants to escalate things. But Linda, she's not going to stop unless someone stands up to her. I can help you. This could give you the leverage you need." The homeowner's heart raced. They didn't know Steve well, but in that moment, it was clear he was offering something invaluable. An ally in the battle against Linda's tyranny. They had been fighting this alone, unsure of how to combat Linda's relentless pursuit. But now, with Steve's help, there was a chance, maybe even a path forward. With a deep breath, the homeowner looked Steve in the eye. "You're sure about this? You're willing to risk everything?" Steve nodded. "I've seen what Linda's capable of. She's been getting away with too much for too long. It's time someone put a stop to it." For the first time since the whole ordeal began, the homeowner felt a flicker of hope. They weren't alone in this fight. They had an ally, and that made all the difference. Visuals. The misty morning enveloping the neighborhood in a quiet, almost eerie calm. The homeowner standing at the door, unsure of who would be on the other side. Steve, his posture tense but resolute, standing at the threshold with the thick file in his hands. A stack of evidence against Linda, the silent ally offering the homeowner a lifeline. The quiet exchange, the weight of the unspoken understanding between them, as the homeowner's fingers brush over the pages filled with damning evidence. It was as if a door had opened, not just in the physical sense, but in the battle ahead, giving them the strength to face Linda's campaign head-on. As Steve walked away, leaving the homeowner with the file, the air seemed to shift. The neighborhood might have been on edge, but the homeowner wasn't alone anymore. And Linda, for all her control, was about to find out just how far someone would go to protect their home and their rights. The days after Steve's visit passed with a strange mix of hope and dread. The homeowner pored over the files Steve had given them, each page revealing something new. An email here, a letter there, all pointing to Linda's long history of manipulation within the HOA. It wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was about standing up to someone who had poisoned the community with their overreach for far too long. But despite the growing sense of empowerment, the homeowner couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. The stakes had changed. This wasn't just about the fence. It was a war now. And Linda, Karen as some of the neighbors had started to call her behind her back, had shown that she would stop at nothing to win. Her power, her influence, stretched much farther than the homeowner had ever anticipated. But now they had the tools to fight back. It was late one afternoon, the air heavy with the promise of a storm, when the homeowner heard it. A familiar, unmistakable sound, the hum of a car engine idling outside. It was just a momentary distraction, a brief interruption in the silence of the street, but it was enough. The homeowner stepped to the window, careful not to be seen, and peered out. Linda's car was parked at the end of the driveway, her sleek, black sedan gleaming ominously in the gray light. She was sitting inside, her face hidden behind darkened windows, but the vehicle was unmistakable. The homeowner's heart began to race. Was she watching? Waiting for them to make a move? Was this a moment of intimidation, or was Linda simply biding her time, planning her next move? For several minutes, the car remained there, silent and still. The homeowner watched, every muscle tense, heart pounding in their chest. They knew better than to confront her now, not with all the legalities hanging in the air, but the sense of unease was overwhelming. Something about the way she lingered made it clear that Linda wasn't just making idle threats, she was preparing to do something more. And the homeowner couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The car suddenly started to move, but instead of leaving, it slowly pulled into the driveway of a house a few doors down. The homeowner exhaled slowly, the tension in their chest easing just slightly. Was she meeting with someone? Had she reached out to another neighbor to build her case against them? The homeowner didn't have time to dwell on it. The day was fading fast, the sky turning a muted orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. The evening was upon them, and with it, a renewed sense of urgency. Linda's presence in the neighborhood wasn't going away, and the homeowner couldn't afford to wait any longer. That evening, they went to work. With the evidence Steve had provided, they crafted their response, a letter to the HOA, one that would make it clear they were not intimidated. They weren't going to be pushed around. It was carefully worded, full of facts and citations, but underneath the polite tone, there was a quiet resolve, a determination to stand firm. But as they typed, something caught their eye. An email that had come through just moments before, a subject line that froze them in their tracks. Urgent. HOA violation, investigation update. The email was from the HOA board. The homeowner clicked it open, feeling a surge of adrenaline as they scanned the message. It wasn't what they had expected. The message wasn't about resolving the complaint. It was about escalating it. The HOA had decided to send out a formal investigator to assess the situation. The homeowner was being summoned to an official hearing to defend their fence in front of the entire board. But what was even more chilling was the name at the bottom of the email. Linda. The HOA had appointed Linda as the lead investigator for the case, the same person who had filed the complaint. The same person who had turned their life upside down was now the one who would decide their fate. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. The homeowner's hands trembled as they read the email again, the implications sinking in. This wasn't just a community issue anymore. It was a setup. Linda had engineered everything. She had twisted the situation to ensure that she held all the power. The storm finally arrived. It wasn't just the gathering clouds or the distant rumble of thunder that brought a sense of impending doom. It was the moment the homeowner realized that the power struggle had escalated beyond anything they could have prepared for. Linda wasn't just a neighbor anymore. She was the hand of authority, the force that seemed to control the very rules of their community, and now she was coming for them with everything she had. The day of the HOA hearing had arrived. The homeowner stood outside their front door, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the front yard. The fence, once a symbol of their independence, now felt like a weight around their neck, a target that had drawn the attention of the very people they had once trusted. They could feel the eyes of the neighborhood on them, even though the streets were eerily quiet. Their pulse quickened as they walked to the car, Steve's words echoing in their mind. "You can't let her win. You've got the truth on your side. Don't let her intimidate you." But as they drove to the HOA office, doubt gnawed at their insides. Could they really stand up to Linda? The woman who had manipulated the entire community for years, who had twisted the HOA rules into a weapon to control others. The hearing wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was about power, about fighting back against someone who had become the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood. When they arrived at the HOA office, the building loomed in front of them like a fortress. It was sterile, gray, with no warmth or charm. A cold symbol of the control Linda had managed to exert over the entire community. The homeowner walked inside, the doors swinging shut behind them with a soft click, a sound that felt far too final. Inside, a long table stretched across the room. On one side sat the members of the HOA board, uninterested faces, their expressions blank and formal. But at the head of the table sat Linda, her smile wide and overly sweet, like a predator playing at civility. She was in her element now, the queen of this domain, and she made it clear that this hearing was just another game she was controlling. The homeowner's stomach twisted as they took their seat across from her. It felt like a stage, a performance where Linda was the lead and everyone else was merely a prop. She had already won. The homeowner could feel it in the air. They were being scrutinized, judged, and the odds seemed stacked so heavily against them that it was almost suffocating. Linda wasted no time, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "We're here today to address a clear violation of HOA regulations," she began, her eyes never leaving the homeowner. A fence was built without proper approval, and as we all know, The integrity of our community depends on strict adherence to these rules. I have repeatedly tried to resolve this issue amicably, but the homeowner has chosen to disregard the standards we've all agreed to. The words felt like daggers, each one stabbing deeper than the last. But the homeowner wasn't about to let Linda's theatrics win. They stood tall, their voice steady as they addressed the room. The fence was built in accordance with the guidelines, they said, their voice cutting through the air like a blade. There is no violation. What's happening here is a personal vendetta, a smear campaign orchestrated by one person. Linda has used her position to intimidate and control this entire neighborhood. And now she's using her power to destroy my right to privacy. A murmur passed through the room. For a moment, the board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, as though the words had hit too close to home. But Linda's smile never wavered. She was prepared for this, ready to counter anything the homeowner said. "That's a bold accusation," she said, her tone dripping with fox sweetness. "But we all know that the rules exist for a reason. It's not personal. It's about the community, the standards we all agreed to when we moved here. Surely, you can see that." But the homeowner's mind was racing. They had proof. Steve's evidence, the stack of documents they had meticulously prepared. They weren't going to let Linda win. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. They reached into their briefcase and pulled out the papers. "You want proof," they said, the words coming out in a low, fierce whisper. "Here's your proof." As they laid the documents on the table, the room fell silent. The evidence was clear: emails, records, and testimony from other residents who had suffered under Linda's reign. It was more than just a defense. It was an accusation that Linda's abuse of power was a well-known secret. The tension in the room was palpable, a thick cloud of uncertainty hanging over everyone present. For the first time in a long while, Linda's unwavering confidence seemed to falter as she stared at the pile of evidence laid out before her. Her eyes flicked back and forth, her lips pressed tight in a forced smile. But there was no denying the tremor of unease creeping into her posture. The tables had turned, and the homeowner could feel it, the weight of the truth crashing down around Linda like a tidal wave. The HOA board members, once passive, now leaned forward, their eyes scanning the documents. A murmur spread through the room, and the silence that followed was almost deafening. The air had shifted from one of scripted control to something raw and real, something Linda couldn't manipulate with a simple smile or a show of authority. The homeowner didn't hesitate. Their voice rang out with the clarity of someone who had finally found their footing after being backed into a corner for far too long. "This isn't about a fence. This is about control. This is about one person deciding who has the right to live in peace and who doesn't." They pointed at Linda, their finger sharp and accusatory. "For years, you've used your position to dictate how people live. You've pushed them around, used petty rules to undermine anyone who didn't conform to your idea of how this neighborhood should function. But no more. Not this time." The board exchanged glances again, their faces etched with concern. The homeowner had struck a nerve. They could see the shift in the room, a moment of doubt blossoming in the eyes of those who had previously stood by as passive bystanders in Linda's reign. The power dynamics that Linda had so carefully crafted seemed to be slipping from her grasp, as if the universe had conspired to deliver this moment of reckoning. Linda's breath hitched. "This is slander," she spat, her eyes narrowing as she took a step forward, trying to reclaim her composure. "You can't just accuse me of things without proof." But the homeowner wasn't backing down. They stood tall, unwavering, as the last pieces of Linda's empire began to crumble. "It's not slander when it's the truth," they countered, their voice steady, each word like a hammer striking against the foundation of Linda's lies. The HOA board, for the first time in the entire hearing, began to speak. One member cleared their throat, another shifted uncomfortably in their chair. "We need to take this seriously," one of them muttered, glancing at Linda. "If these accusations are true, we can't just ignore them." Linda's face turned pale, the mask she had so carefully maintained slipping away. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words faltered, as if she too could sense the shift in the room. She was losing control. The homeowner could see it. It wasn't just Linda's confidence that was crumbling. It was the web of influence she had spun over the entire HOA. The homeowner had exposed the cracks in the foundation, and now the truth was spilling out, undeniable and irrefutable. Minutes passed in silence, the weight of the evidence sinking in. And then the HOA president, a middle-aged man with graying hair, cleared his throat. "We've heard enough," he said, his voice firm. "We will need to discuss this privately and come to a decision." Linda's gaze was wild now, panic flickering behind her eyes. She knew the outcome was no longer certain. The very thing she had relied on to maintain control, her position, her influence, was slipping through her fingers. And for the first time, she was facing the very real possibility of losing everything. The homeowner stood there, breathing heavily, the storm of emotions finally settling into a quiet, determined calm. They had done it. They had taken the truth and weaponized it, standing tall against the tyranny of someone who had thought herself invincible. Outside, the storm that had been brewing all day finally broke, the first raindrops beginning to tap against the windows of the HOA office. The heavy sound of rainfall against the glass seemed to mirror the turmoil inside the room. Thunder rumbled in the distance, as if echoing the finality of the moment. The HOA members filed out of the room, leaving Linda standing there, fuming and defeated. The homeowner followed, a quiet sense of victory swelling inside them. They had done what no one else had dared to do. They had stood up to the bully, the tyrant, and they had won. The final decision came a few days later, but it was clear before the official letter arrived. Linda's influence had been broken. The HOA board had conducted a full investigation into her actions, uncovering the years of manipulation, the false complaints, and the blatant abuse of power. She was removed from her position with immediate effect, her reign of terror over the neighborhood shattered beyond repair.